Hi, Beth Neville for Art and Life, and it really is a beautiful life today. A cool, beautiful June day. The temperature is just right, the humidity is down, people are walking around enjoying themselves. We in Massachusetts and Milton seem to be at the present moment doing well with containing the virus, so we're all feeling great about being outside and in the fresh air. What a relief. Okay, so another part of the relief, I hope, will be to have some fun watching me struggle to do a watercolor of a waterfall. Last week, we used this calendar and I did some schematic drawings of certain waterfalls to try to figure out how we would do them. This one was one of the waterfalls that we spoke of. So hopefully that lesson will help you a little bit in determining how you would paint a waterfall if you were out and looking at one live, which is of course the way I think we should do it. Now, I said I would demonstrate how to paint a waterfall, and of course I mentioned Bash Bish Falls in the Taconic Hills in western Massachusetts as a fine place that I enjoyed tremendously with my family for visits. It was a very important place to visit for people in Columbia County, a farming community in New York State. So we're not in Bash Bish Falls. If we were, I would be painting from life. So the next best thing is to take a photograph of it, and Robert, I can also, we can post this. So this is the photograph that I'm using to demonstrate how to paint a waterfall. Now, we're going to do a little bit of talking about this before I get going, and then we will change the camera position. And thank you to Robert Neville, my husband, who is graciously consenting on this beautiful Sunday morning to leave the New York Times reading and come out and help me with the photography for a few minutes. Also, Tom Pilla, the editor from Milton Access TV, is so helpful. He's such a wonderful teacher. All right, the characteristic of the falls that makes them so popular, first of all, it's just a beautiful setting in the hills and easy to get to, is this rock. It seems to be a boulder that is just poised to fall down. But in my lifetime, and I won't tell you how old I am, it has never fallen. It looks exactly like this as a child, and it remains today. And what this boulder does is to divide the falls into two segments, making it a very romantic image. And looking through the paper, I can see to the other side, I can see that the peak of the boulder is reflected almost exactly in the triangle to the base of the two falls. So if we turn this upside down, it might be a little more obvious to you. Sometimes looking at things upside down gives you a new way of seeing it. So do you see this diamond, this triangle here, is reflected by that triangle there. And this curve here is reflected by this curve over here. And that it makes the falls, I think, a particularly romantic image. Always, I always remember that there's almost always a log jammed across the top. I'm sure the log jammed in this photo is not the same one that was there many decades ago when I was a child, but it does seem to be a classic place for a log to get jammed. And as we talked last week, the pool in which the water plunges seems to be more flat, and the white down at the bottom, the white frothy foam of the plunge pool, depends on how far the water is falling down. This photo was obviously taken in the spring when the snow is melting off. You can go sometimes there in the late summer and just see a little trickle coming down and be quite disappointed. So if you do decide to visit Bash Bish, and I'm sure the tourist industry in that area would love to have you come out from Boston area and look at their beautiful Berkshire Hills and spend a little loose change. If you do decide to go, it probably will not be as dramatic as this in late August. This is probably April, May, June, a view just after the snows in the hills have melted. So we're going to change camera position and concentrate more on my drawing and on how to work with the drawing. Okay? So here we are with my watercolor tray, not very clean, but that's okay. And I'm going to use a small pad of paper that was given to me by a friend, watercolor paper, 100% cotton, 140-pound, acid-free, made in the USA, cold press finish. It's a very smooth paper, and I think this will be interesting to demonstrate how some things are done. So instead of plunging, I love that, plunging into the pool, plunging into this watercolor, I'm going to take a few sections and see if we can't demonstrate how those areas would be done. Now, you have to understand that when I do a demonstration like this, this is pretty much uncharted territory. And I don't know how it's going to come out. So it's risky. Some of these little demonstrations may come out beautifully and others may be, not so good. Let's start with the rocks, though. One of the characteristics of New England mountains, in general, eastern mountains, is that they're very, very old granite. They've been worn down for hundreds of thousands of years. So they're not, they're soft and they're tree covered. I remember when I went out to the Rocky Mountains and saw Pikes Peak. I was a kid. I just thought it was awful. I said, it's nothing but a pile of rocks. It was so ugly because it didn't have any trees. For me, the delight of eastern mountains is the interplay of the trees and the rocks peeking through. And to just see a great big giant pile of boulders like Pikes Peak was very disappointing to me. I now see it in a different light, but that was my childhood age 13 memory. We all know how 13-year-olds react to something new and different, not always in the most gracious way. I think my aunt who paid for the trip was probably devastated that I was not impressed with Pikes Peak. Okay, so let's take this rock, typical New England flattened down rock, and I need to have a bit of a drawing to get going here. I just cannot plunge in, particularly in a landscape watercolor, without having some, and I'm going to imagine the water here curling around. Now I'm aware that you probably cannot see my little drawing, so let's get going right away with the paint. And I think I'm going to have to shift over here. Yeah. Okay, Robert, how are we doing? Is this going to
just fine?
Work? Okay, great, thanks. Okay, we're going to start out with, I've got a soft gray over here, and it's a good thing to have the tray a little bit grungy at this point, or not grungy, it's not, but I mean with mixed colors here, because these colors will make the gray a little livelier, a little different. And I'm going to put on a first coat of a very watery light gray. All right, this is my undercoat. How are we doing here? Is this showing up?
Okay.
Okay. Excuse me about the throat, my early morning foggy throat. Sorry about that. Excuse me. Okay, so I'm coming along here trying to indicate that I really like the color. I'm trying to add for that light color, and I'm leaving a lot of white showing through. All right, let's do another one while we're waiting for this to dry. That has to dry. Supposing we're going to do the big rock itself. All right, so it kind of comes this shape. It has a central portion here, and it comes down here in a big curve over there. This kind of line comes down, and then there's a very dramatic side boulder that protrudes out, and a big swoopy line going back. That probably is too high that's not an accurate drawing. And this also, we're going to come in here and leaving lots of light places, we're going to come in and get down a very pale basic gray to try to define the rock. And you can see how I'm relying on my little schematic sketch. I was brought up by Gertrude Tipple as a painter, as a young kid, age 13, not to draw first. You know, that was sort of, we weren't supposed to be doing that. And then I went to a museum as a college student and looked at Winslow Homer, the greatest watercolorist who ever lived. I looked at it, I said, oh my gosh, he drew first, he had lines, he drew, there's pencil, I can see the graphite. And I said to myself, if it's good enough for Winslow Homer, it's good enough for me. And I've been drawing ever since. I stopped thinking I had to be a purist. That all came out of the abstract expressionist movement, where you were not supposed to do anything preliminary. It was all supposed to be very spontaneous and, you know. Unfortunately, this is not dried. So let's do another one. This must dry before I do my next part. If I put paint on there now, it's going to blur. It's going to go bloop, blur. They call that wet on wet. We don't want that. So how are we going to take on these trees? My theory about watercolor is you start light and go dark. It's interesting to see in pastel that it works to start dark and go light. But in watercolor, I believe the opposite is true. So I'm going to pick a very dramatic yellow. This is a lemon yellow. You see these yellows up in here where the sunlight is hitting above the rocks up there. The sun is shifting down on, shining down. So let's take this little tree over here. For this tree, I don't necessarily need to draw first. See what I'm aiming for up here? Little dabs of yellow, a little bit more dabs over here. All right, another section of yellow coming over, then more. And then as it comes down, the green shifts to, the yellow shifts to a green. So we'll begin introducing just a little bit of the green in here. More green as it gets deeper into shadow. And trying to, you notice I did not draw the trunk first. No, you don't draw the trunk first. You draw the trunk last because it disappears. We see trunk, green, trunk, green, trunk, green, so on and so forth. So if you draw the trunk all the way to the top, that's a big beginner mistake. The first thing they do is this. They get brown, which is not the color of the trunk, so that's mistake number one. And then they go boom, and they draw the trunk, and then they try to hang the tree on the trunk. It does not work. The trunk is going to show through, and you'll have a problem. Now let's see if this is dry. I thought on a nice day like today, I'm looking for a glint of water to see. I'm feeling it. No, it still feels damp. Can't have it be damp. It's got to be dry. Oh, this one seems to be drying faster. All right, now what we're going to do next is we're going to attempt to hint at the gravelly mottled look. So for that, we need a slightly darker shade, not purple. That was definitely, I didn't realize that was a purple. That was a huge mistake. No, we don't want that. We're looking for Payne's Gray. Let's see, might be the Payne's Gray over there. Yeah, this is the Payne's Gray. Okay, that's getting better. All right, I'm pretty happy with this color. It may be too dramatic. Yeah, I think it's going to be too dark. So we're watering it down. You see, I'm kind of taking a look at it. You can have a test paper. All right, and test out. A lot of my students do that. They have a test paper and they'll test the colors out. Okay, I'm going to attempt to show the shadow up there on the rock, and then the shadow comes down. There's a little bit of a shadow here. The shadow kind of continues over in this area. All right, and then kind of more of a shadow here. There's a pretty dramatic shadow in there. And this is very dark. See that dark right there? We're going to make that even darker because that's really, really stands out. And then down in here, this area, this is really quite dark in here. And it tends to kind of come down this way. Then over here it lightens up again, so I add a lot of water to my brush, a lot of water, and pull down there, pull in over here. All right, now I'm going to soften this ever so slightly with a little bit of water on my brush, so it's not quite such a harsh line. I'm keeping the sharp contour over here, and then in this area over here, I'm going to kind of dabble, dap, 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 dap. You see these little lines here? They seem to go this way, the strata, that way. And then back here, we're going to make it dramatically darker to make this rock really hopefully pop forward. Then in here, underneath, down in here, it begins to veer this way. There's a little bit of green in there. This is something you don't want. See that frayed cabbagey line? Is that showing up? See that little line there? Don't want that to happen. If you catch it quickly, you can usually just put a little water on it and see if you can soften that. That is considered a no-no in watercolor, to have that type of a line appear. This is my first time I've used this pad, and I will have to see if I like the paper. I'm not all convinced so far that it's really great paper. All right, now it gets very dark. Pretend this isn't here. This gets very dark in here to show that line. So this would come down dramatically dark and dramatically dark over here. There's another thing there. So we would be kind of, you know, we could play with this for a long time to try to indicate what's going on with this rock. All right, let's flip back to the tree, because the tree, yes, the tree is dried. Behind the tree we see gray. So with a light gray, all right, I'm going to go in with a small brush. No, it's wet. Okay, all right. See how it bled up into there? Okay, that was because it was still wet. And we're now coming in here with the gray in behind the tree. That's the next step. Hint at the gray in the spaces. You don't have to be too exact. When I first started doing watercolors, I was painfully exact. I would paint like this. I would go like that and like that. It would take me hours and hours and hours to do watercolor. But as I got older and more free with my watercolor, I stopped doing that. Okay, let's take this color down here. Another thing we could do with this, instead of going into the grays, is we could head this towards the browns. So let's take a different color here. Oh, this is really dramatic. Okay, this could be the backside of this rock. Wow, that's a real shift in color. Let's soften a little bit with more gray. I think it's a little bit too much. All right, and now I'm going to hint at the curls of the water on this flat rock over here and dip into my brownish gray and hint at some of these depressions and ripples in the rock. Try to add a little more texture here. It's got dimples. It's got a lot more texture in it. So we're kind of playing with that texture, and then it kind of comes around the corner. I don't like this paper. I can tell right away I don't like it. If paper were really good, it wouldn't have formed what they call a cabbage there. It wouldn't have formed that mottled line. All right, so now we're going to go wet on wet. This is where this is, oh, wrong color. Oh dear, that's absolutely wrong. It's too yellowy, and this rock is in a woodland in deep shadow, and it would be very unlikely to have, I can see I dipped into the burnt sienna. Oh dear, I'm in the wrong color. Ah, wrong color. All right, let's see if we can overcome it with Payne's gray. So I'm adding more Payne's gray to try to overcome that. All right, too much of a contrast. I certainly am glad I'm doing this here instead of on my drawing. I think what I'm going to end up doing is kind of continuing to demonstrate here on this paper, and not go into that drawing. I like that drawing a lot. I'd like to have that come out well. All right, let's go back to the tree here. How would you get a trunk in here? What you would do would be to take one of your colors, and again, this almost looks like a black. We're not going to use black, but we're also, we're going to get a dark color here. And I wish I had a dark brown out, an umber. I don't see any umber, and I don't want to take time. Let's see what this is. All right, this is a darker color. We're trying to get the Payne's gray, too dark. All right, back to the brown. We're aiming for, okay, that's about it right there. That's got some Payne's gray in it. It's got some of Davies gray, and it has a little bit of umber in it. So that's about right. So what you would do here, if it's dry, oh dear, it's wet, still wet. I can see, by tipping it, I can see the glisten of the water, and that is a sure sign that it's still wet. So we're stymied there. Let's take on while we're waiting, I'm going to shift brushes because I want to save that color. I'm going to shift to another. By the way, I'm using a round that comes to a sharp point because in nature I find the rounds work the best. All right, we're going to use blue-green for the water. These deep pools reflect the leaves, usually the leaves color, the leaf color, and not so much sky. So they tend to take on sort of an emerald look. Remember that water is colorless. So the reason it has color is what's underneath, what strata's underneath, and what it's reflecting. And this pool is basically reflecting trees in shadow, so it's going to be kind of green. So where the water kind of comes curling around here, we can pretend or indicate the water with a blue-green color. I hope this is dry. It seems to be dry. If the water were coming up tight, very tight here to the rock, close to it, it would be very dark. So the only time you would have any white showing would be where there's foam. And in general, it's easiest to show running water by consecutive lines, curly lines. So running water often will look like this. The lines will be kind of following each other in curving patterns. It might curve up this way, it might trail that way. All depends. And they can be thicker and thin. And while you're making them, you can come back while they're wet and make some of them darker. Fill in a little bit. Leave some highlights. Always leave highlights in water, always. You can make the lines bigger, like that. You can make them narrower. However you want to go about it. All kinds of ways. This was wet. That's why that bled in there. That's not good. It's a very slow drying paper. I'm surprised. We have a beautiful day out here, and paper is still drying very slowly. All right, let's see if we can get the tree trunk in. Nah. All right, I'm going to shift back to my brown brush. And that color I had mixed. So what you're going to do is you're going to come in here and hint at, particularly in the gray spaces, because the gray is where you would be seeing the trunk. You wouldn't see it, that was still wet. You might hit at a few branches here in the gray areas. Remember, the gray is the space, maybe a lateral branch coming in. That's a little bit big. If I had a cloth to blot, I'd blot that. That line is too large. So we'd be hinting at the tree trunk here. That's, I don't have a tissue with me, but I would, if I did, I would blot that, okay? But I don't have a tissue. All right, okay. So when this dries, you could go back into the greens again. What we do with watercolors, many layers, hopefully, so you could come in underneath your light green and areas and hint at darker shadows. Up in here a little bit. You know, you just kind of keep playing around with it. And underneath the rock here is very dark. Let's see here. This is probably too wet, but what I would do to really make the tree stand out would be to make the rock very dark underneath there, and very dark over here, even darker than that. I'd probably come in with a second coat so that the tree would begin to be silhouetted, maybe some more dark in there, and darker out here, dark, 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 dark. You know, so that tree would begin to pop out a little bit. Try to get that to come out. I wish I had a little tissue. It's always important with watercolor to have some kind of a tissue handy. All right, so that kind of gives you an idea. And then when that dried, I'd come in with more, particularly the more green here. Right up here, I don't like this. This line runs right straight across, so that would need to be destroyed, pulled back. Okay, the tree's kind of coming along. That's sort of fun. All right, well, that would be the tree. Let's see what we can do with this rock down here. Yeah. All right, we're going to be more dramatic. We're going to come in with more brown. I think this is a sienna I'm working with. It's kind of hard to tell. Yeah, it's a sienna. What I really should have out here would be burnt umber. Okay, so supposing we want to be even more dramatic with this rock, we could come in here. This is dry now. You know, really add to that drama of the rock. Maybe come in here a little bit more dramatically. Same thing over here. Really emphasize the shadow. This is a little bit too mechanical. I think I would kind of rough that up a little bit. And down here, maybe you could almost go completely black, dark, you know, in this area. Same thing there, down. Now, if we did that, maybe some more here. Time to unite this area and that area a little bit. All right. So suppose if it were this dark here, now I can't do it because it's too wet, but what you could do is come in here with a really, really strong emerald green with a lot of blue and a lot of green in it. I wish it were drying faster. We'll just pretend. You see, I would bring this right up to the rock because this is in dense shade here, dense shade. So this could be very dark over in here. And this area could appear a little lighter. And you can come into your greens and add your blues and add another layer. That's the biggest mistake amateurs make. They don't go in for enough layers. Maybe even a little emerald up here in our tree would be fun. This is not drying completely. We could emphasize the trunk again, you know, with a different color. Play around more with that. All right, I think that's enough for today. Let me do one more thing to make this rock pop out. Supposing we came in here, over here, with a grayish green, and we filled this in over here. All right, and made it look as if it were in the forest. All right, let's see if we can't make this rock look a little more dramatic. Okay, this is going to be forest over here. Forest, forest, okay. All right, so our rock is beginning to kind of pop. Maybe a little moss on the rock. How about some moss? Or even reflected water, color of the reflected water. That's another little trick. You can, if the green's down here, the green will be reflecting up on that rock, and you can add that color. Let's see if we can make this one pop out, and then I think we really have to stop. Right, Robert, aren't we just about at the end? We must be up, all right. So supposing this also had a forest background, you see how that would kind of come forward. And I think there was a little green twiggy tree in here. We'd add that, green twiggy tree, and so on and so forth. Okay, well, I think this is a better way of doing it.